after teaching high school for 11 years and teaching college science for 6 years and then teaching 6 years in college being a science teacher trainer, I'm actually one of the few people who is credentialed to critique and criticize science textbooks. And that's what I'm going to do tonight. The topic is, what are the schools teaching and how to spot lies in the textbooks. Now, in 45 minutes, I can't go over all the lies that the textbooks have because they're just riddled with these assumptions and these misleading things suggesting that evolution is flawless. Well, I'm going to focus on one of them big time and then gradually work my way down and start doing them in rapid fire at the end, but in a way that everyone will, of course, understand. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue. I like Mark Twain. Now that I live in Oklahoma, I quote Will Rogers a lot more, but they're both American humorists. I've never let my schooling interfere with my education. And in the textbooks versus the homeschoolers, I think this is very, very applicable. Now, some people say, well, no, they don't teach evolution really early and young. My girl in kindergarten was being taught that dinosaurs were millions and hundreds of millions of years old. Take a look at this one here from Dr. Seuss. A Dr. Seuss book says here, from fossils, dinosaur teeth, eggs, and bone got stuck in the muck. Then that muck turned to stone. These fossils are old. They are dusty and worn because they were made long before you were born. Now, look at what it says over not hundreds of years, not thousands of years, but millions of years long before you were born. The indoctrination starts a whole lot earlier in children's educations than you might imagine. Here is a famous textbook author, Kenneth Miller from Brown University, author of one of the most popular biology high school textbooks in the country. Look what he says during the recent Texas school board debate. He says, the theory of evolution has no weaknesses. Now, that is not an unbiased author of a science textbook. This is Miller. How many have ever seen this textbook? This high school biology, a very popular textbook. I want to show you a few things in this and several other textbooks and also one college textbook. Here is a little early on in the book. It explains about evolution. It says here, in genetic terms, evolution is any change in the relative frequency of alleles. An allele is a gene for a trait, and the frequency just means how often it shows up, which is a term you already know. You just need to get comfortable with that. That's all. For example, if the relative frequency of the B allele in the mouse population changed over time to 30%, the population is evolving. In other words, if there's more brown mice next generation, that's evolution. That's like saying that in 100 years, if there are more red-haired people in the human population, then evolution has occurred, because that's a change in the frequency of the red-haired gene. It now shows up more frequently. If that's all evolution is, I believe, you see. But is there any new DNA? New genes? New traits? No. There's just more of the same red-haired people now than there were 100 years, you see, ago. And so that is a process of change. But it is not a process that is going to change worms into bald eagles, is it? It's just shifts in something that was already there. But they'll say, that's evolution. And of course, who could deny that this doesn't happen? Of course it happens. Now, they let the other shoe drop and say, well, that's evolution. And now who doesn't believe in Darwin? You see, very misleading. It's almost a bait and switch tactic. How many of you like Johnny Hart, BC? Remember Brother Johnny? I believe we were put here for a purpose. Nonsense. We're here simply because we survived. Survived what? Why, the big swamp, of course. You think we came out of a swamp? Certainly. Look around you. Nothing but slime balls. Well, now that you mention it. Okay, how do you explain love? Give it up, kid. If we aren't here to survive, we wouldn't have survived to be here. And then the punchline is, lousy logic is more palatable if you sloganize it. Evolution has slogans. Slogans like descent with modification. How many ever heard that one? A lot of the creation science learned people. Change in allele frequency, which is what I just showed you. Heterozygote advantage, talking about sickle cell anemia being an advantage mutation. And acquired microbial resistance. How many of you ever heard that germs are evolving to be immune to our medicines? How many of you ever heard that? Yeah, well, I'm going to go into that one later. Okay, we'll get to it. How many ever seen this high school biology textbook? Yes, it's very popular. It's probably one put together by McGraw-Hill, Glencoe, and National Geographic got together on this. Let me show you just one of the many, but one of the more profound contradictions in this textbook. Right here, there's Lynn Margulis, by the way, another person. The origin of life. Every evolutionist, how many saw the movie Expelled? Expelled, remember, Michael Roos was there with Ben Stein, and Ben Stein says, so explain to me how life started. I didn't think I was going to do this, Daniel, but I did. And he says, well, it started on the box of crystals. And he says, okay, so there was no life, and then there was life. How did that actually work? Well, I've already told you it's on the box of crystals. So every evolutionist believes in spontaneous generation, that life came from non-life. They'll deny it, but I said to the vice president of the Darwin Coalition once, you all believe it happened at least once, right? And he didn't know what to say. Look at what it says here in the book. People once thought that life was able to arise spontaneously from non-living material. Two scientists, Francesco Redi and Louis Pasteur, designed controlled experiments to try to disprove spontaneous generation. Their experiments convinced scientists to accept the theory of biogenesis, that life comes only from pre-existing life. That's the cornerstone of biology, is biogenesis. But look now, the next paragraph, look! Modern ideas about the origin of life. Scientific evidence supports the hypothesis that small organic molecules formed from substances present in the Earth's early atmosphere and oceans. At some point, nucleic acids must have formed. How? Must is just like a magic word. That's all. It must have formed from inorganic molecules that turned into small organic molecules. Then clusters of organic molecules might have formed protocells that may have evolved into the first true cells. How many people see this contradiction? On the same page, life comes only from pre-existing life. Nobody believes life arises spontaneously. In the next paragraph, life formed all by itself. And these people are not necessarily liars. They're not stupid. They don't know they did this. There it is. Your eyes are open. You know, you have been given the sight to see. Evolutionists are not stupid people, but smart people can believe a stupid thing. How many have ever seen this picture in a textbook? Now, my brother Tom DeRosa this morning introduced to us Haeckel's embryos. And of course, I'm highlighting here for you these little gills they're showing. See how fish have gills, but so do salamanders and turtles and chickens and rabbits and people. They all have gills in this stage of development. And these are copies of Ernst Haeckel's drawings from the University of Jena that Tom was showing us this morning. But let's take a little look at the print under this picture in a modern college biology textbook. It says right down here, a comparison of vertebrate embryos at 3 stages of development, redrawn from G.J. Romaine's Darwin After Darwin, Open Court Publishing Company, 1901. This textbook was in the 1990s. It says 1901. Let me tell you the story. I'll flesh out and add to the story that Tom was telling you this morning about Ernst Haeckel. In 1859, Darwin writes his book, The Origin of the Species. And in 1866, Ernst Haeckel, who thinks Darwin is the best thing since sliced bread, draws these pictures of embryos in support of Darwin's theory that evolution is recapitulated or recapped in the womb. And embryonic development retells this ancient history of the story of evolution for every species, and obviously showing how every species evolved from fish, because they all have gills. Now, there's a little problem with this. There is a series of bars and grooves on the neck, in the neck region of these embryos. That is true, and humans have got them too. They're called the pharyngeal arches or pharyngeal pouches or pharyngeal grooves. They never develop into anything that has to do with gills. Nothing that has to do with respiration. They are the bed of muscles through which the blood vessels and nerves go from the trunk to the skull. They also form into the thymus gland and in the middle ear. They are never a hole from the neck into the throat, so they're not slits. If they're not gills and they're not slits, you cannot call them gill slits. But textbooks do it all the time. Now, Ernst Haeckel, just 8 years after he published these drawings, in 1874 was found guilty of scientific fraud. He faked these drawings. He faked the drawings to make them look more human or more fish-like. He chopped the arms and legs, the limb buds, off the human embryo to make it look more like a fish. You don't see any arms and legs on it. He darkened the eye of the chicken embryo to make it look more like a mammal. He did a lot of things to it. He exaggerated the size of some of them, made them 10 times bigger or 10 times smaller to make them look similar. And I'll show you some more evidence of that too. In 1874, Ernst Haeckel was found guilty of scientific fraud, and his drawings were lost. In 1901, somebody found these things in a drawer and said, hey, this looks like good proof for evolution. Let's put it in our book. And it's been in the textbooks ever since, and you've seen it in the books. Everybody knows it's a matter of history. It's not controversy, it's history. Haeckel faked these drawings. And let me show you what some of our brilliant textbooks have done with this. Now, a comparison of the gill arches from different embryos. Now, little gills here. That's an example from another biology book. You've probably seen these kind of things. This is from a college biology book, Sylvia Mader's Inquiry to Life, 11th edition. I taught out of the 7th edition when I taught college biology. And it says right here, organisms share a unity of plan because of common descent. Remember I said common descent is one of those evolution things? We are common descent with this little monkey-like thing that the monkeys and us both came from. Common descent. We all can trace our common descent back to a fish, and all the fish and us can all trace our common descent back to a worm, you see, and all the way back to a germ that came from non-living things. That's the story, and they're sticking to it. Now here, at this comparable stage of development, a chick embryo and a pig embryo have many features in common, which suggests they evolved from a common ancestor. Indeed, continue in modern textbooks to use this idea that was based on a fake drawing. Here in 1997, Science magazine, one of the most premier journals of science in the world, has this article, Haeckel's Embryos Fraud Rediscovered. Look what it says. This is not a creationist journal, it's totally evolutionist. Generations of biology students may have been misled by a famous set of drawings of embryos published 123 years ago by the German biologist Ernst Haeckel. Let's look at another part of the article here. It looks like it's turning out to be one of the most famous fakes in biology, Richardson concludes. This news might not have been so shocking to Haeckel's peers in Germany a century ago. They got Haeckel to admit he relied on memory and used artistic license in preparing his drawings. The guy wasn't even looking through the microscope when he drew these pictures. Now, when I taught high school and college biology, when we were using monocular or one-lensed microscopes, I taught the students to do it this way. You put one eye on the microscope and one eye on a piece of paper, and you draw with one eye while you look with the other. That's how careful you're supposed to be. The guy went home and drew these things to make them look just like what he wanted them to look like. And it's like what Roger Lewin, the famous evolutionist, said, I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't believed it. In 2004, National Geographic in November decided to put out a special issue on how evolution is completely true. Every once in a while, these science journals will do this. They'll put out a special issue all about how creationists are stupid and evolution is true. If they've got to say it that many times, what's that say to you? But in this one, they also had the embryo story. And look what it says. An animal's complex adult form emerges from as an embryo developed. The early embryos of 3 different vertebrates here, fish, chicken, and human, look much the same, but genes active, blah, blah, guide the development. Evolution often reshapes organisms by tinkering with the genes that control development. Tinkering, like it knows what it's doing. You see, it's giving it a personality almost. It's almost like a god of some kind. And look at what it says in the fine print. Drawings not to scale. They're doing the same thing Haeckel did. Make them bigger or smaller, whatever it takes to exaggerate the similarities. Now that might not be totally lying, but it's totally misleading. And it's seeing something as you wish it was. That's wishful thinking. It's certainly not education. And it borders, if not defines, indoctrination. Stephen Jay Gould, one of the most famous evolutionists of the 20th century, said this about this thing in an article in Natural History magazine called Abscheulich, which means atrocious in German. Look what he says. We should not therefore be surprised that Haeckel's drawings entered 19th century textbooks, the 1800s. But we do, I think, have the right to be both astonished and ashamed by the century of mindless recycling that has led to the persistence of those drawings in a large number, if not a majority, of modern textbooks. Evolutionists know this is a fake, and they know it's been in the books for over 100 years, and we can't get it out. What about look at it. How many have heard of UCal Berkeley? University of California, Berkeley, the Berkeley Evolution One-Stop website, and I keep checking this. It first appeared in 2002. It's still there. Look at what it says. Chicken embryo, human embryo with gill slits. Chickens and humans do not have gill slits. And look, honestly, the embryologists at Berkeley, they know this. They know better. They know better. As a scientist, as a teacher, I'm appalled. I'm professionally mortified by this stuff. These guys know better. They know better. Well, in what did Kenneth Miller in his famous biology textbook do? Since this is 2006 and Science magazine brought out Haeckel's guilt in 1997, let's see what Dr. Miller has to say about it in his book. He says, there have, in the past, been incorrect explanations for these similarities. Also, the biologist Ernst Haeckel fudged some of his drawings to make the early stages of some embryos seem more similar than they actually are. Errors aside, however, it is clear that the same groups of embryonic cells develop in the same order, similar patterns, blah, 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 blah. Look at what he has on the side here. In the early stages of development, chickens, turtles, and rats look similar, providing evidence they shared a common ancestor, inferring. Okay, look. He's just left the smoking gun on the table. He is admitting that Haeckel, and Miller said he was going to do that. He was going to take it out of his book, and he didn't. He just put in there, so what if Haeckel lied? It's still true. That's the answer. Look, as a teacher, we have a sacred trust to just teach the truth, and stuff that's opinion we should tell the students, and this is what the opinion is. But to say this proves evolution is true is a lie. How many like Calvin and Hobbes? I'm a big Calvin and Hobbes fan. Can't teach science without Calvin and Hobbes. There you go. These are interesting times. We don't trust the government, we don't trust the legal system, we don't trust the media, and we don't trust each other. We've undermined all authority, and with it, the basis for replacing it. Oh, interesting is a mild way of putting it. It's like a 6-year-old's dreams come true. Well, we can't trust our teachers. We can't trust our universities. We can't trust professors or textbooks or National Geographic or Animal Planet or the History Channel or Discovery Channel or Walking with Dinosaurs or any of these guys. Is it because they're liars? Some of them know better, and they are liars. But most of them are only just teaching what they were taught. They don't know. They just don't know. You know now. And so now what are you going to do with that? Let's go back to Dr. Miller's textbook. I want to show you something else in there. Microvariation. You heard a talk about microvariation from Don Batten, and he said that it really should be microvariation, not microevolution. That's a misnomer. Again, it's very misleading. Labeled evolution in bacteria, which I mentioned, germs evolving to be immune to our medicines, moths, and finches. It's really natural selection that is generalized to be applied to as evidence for macroevolution, which of course it's not. The results are totally transparent to the issue and have nothing to do with any kind of a process that could take us from bacteria to woolly mammoths. Nothing to do with it at all. I'm going to prove you to this here. Let's take a look at this little part of Dr. Miller's book. Near the end it says, why is understanding evolution important? Because evolution continues today, driving changes in living worlds such as drug resistance in bacteria and viruses, and pesticide resistance in insects, and herbicide resistance in weeds. And evolutionary theory helps us understand and respond to these changes that help improve it. This is an urban myth. I can tell you this, any microbiologist knows. Check any graduate level microbiology textbook and you only find 3 ways that bacteria can have resistance to antibiotic drugs, and I'm going to show you what those ways are. This is that other biology textbook. Let's take a look at how they bring up this whole thing. They say here, superbugs defy drugs. Look at that, isn't that amazing? How many disease-causing bacteria have developed resistance to the antibiotics that used to kill them. This is just an urban myth. Urban myth. And I have spoken this in front of large crowds of university students and professors, and they can't say anything when I say this because they know what I'm telling you is true. Okay, let's take a look in a textbook here, and I think this is the Glencoe textbook, and they give an example of what happens, how this happens. See, they've got a whole bunch of bacteria here. The red ones are not resistant to the new drug, but the blue ones are resistant. They're natural. Okay, this can happen in a population. How many people here in the audience are immune to poison ivy? How many? Look around, look and see their hands, okay? And what if a Stephen King novel came true called Ivy, you know? And what if tomorrow morning we woke up and the whole world was crawling with poison ivy? And it's cracking in the windows, it's coming out your faucets, and all the rest of us ivy sensitives would itch to death. And the people that just raised their hands would be left to populate the earth again, you see. Now, within a few generations, we would have a big population of people and everybody's immune. And evolutionists would say, look, a new race of humans has evolved. It's the same thing with these germs. At the beginning, before you use the antibiotic, look, we got some germs are resistant and some germs are non-resistant. We use the antibiotic and it kills the red ones. Only a few red ones are left, but now look at all the blue ones. It's a shift in gene frequency again. And look what it says. The resistant bacteria live and produce more resistant bacteria. Okay, let's just do something very kindergarten simple here. Before the evolution occurred, there were red and blue bacteria. And after the magic of evolution, there were red and blue bacteria, just more blue ones. Any new genes? New DNA? New information? New traits? No, is this evolution? Oh, they say it is. It's a shift in gene frequency. This process is only going to get you more blue ones. It's not going to turn the bacteria into pterodactyls, which is what their theory says happens. Okay, now, just look at this kind of labeling. The development of bacterial resistance to antibiotics is direct evidence for evolution. Infer again, because some species have evolved. Again, if that's what they mean by evolution, I believe. But this happens. We can see it every day. But that's not a process that's capable of changing bacteria into something else, or of changing a monkey into a person, or a fish into an amphibian, into a reptile, into a mammal, or into a bird. That won't do it. But they'll say, well, just imagine. Right. You see, I'm talking about hard, fast data, observations, evidence, logic, and reason. This, as we've often said to you, is just a story. We can see this, and then they just say, well, just imagine way past this, and you'll get how we evolved. That's not how science is supposed to work, not on imagination like that. Do germs evolve? No. Bacteria cannot evolve resistance to antibiotics. Like I said, in many cases, there's already somebody in the group that's already immune. The poison ivy or the poison antibiotic kills everyone except the ones who are naturally immune, and they're the only ones left to reproduce, and so pretty soon everybody's immune, and the population grows back again. And the evolutionists say, look, see, everyone thinks that the germs are standing around waiting for us to invent some new drugs, and they go, look, the humans have invented a new antibiotic, quick, let's evolve. You know, and it's like the Batmobile shielding, or no, Iron Man's. That's right, now it's Iron Man's little protective shielding. Now we're shielded, we're ready. No. Look, if you've got 1 million bacteria floating through your system and they give you an antibiotic, injection or orally, and it kills all his little buddies, but there's just 1 out of 1 million. How do bacteria reproduce? They just split in half. And it can do this every 15 minutes in a warm, nutrient-rich bath like your bloodstream. Okay, and then after 20 more minutes, there's 4 of them, and I'll drop this if I do that. Then there's 8 of them, and then after 20 more minutes, there's 20. I'm using my toes now. Okay, now within 8 hours you'll have 1 million again, and all of them look like mama. They're all immune to the same antibiotic drug. They'll call this proof of evolution. Can you see how nonsensical that is? That's just very bad thinking. But they wouldn't have seen it if they hadn't believed it. You see, it's wishful thinking. There's another way. Bacteria have a lot of their DNA in little Cheerio-shaped chromosomes called plasmids. And they crank these things out and just sort of sweat them out into the environment, and they can trade them with each other like Pokemon cards, or Yu-Gi-Oh cards, or baseball cards, or whatever. They can trade them. It's called plasmid transfer. If one germ in the whole world is immune to a new drug that we got, he can give that immunity card to every other germ on the planet. And they can do this between species. It doesn't matter. So that's another way they can be immune. Just one guy on the whole planet, and he can give it to everybody else. Another way, a mutation can occur that causes a gene to dysfunction and no longer produce a certain trait. Many antibiotic molecules depend on transprotein membranes. They're sort of like little docking sites, like Velcro on the skin of a bacterium, and they have to have just the right, it's like a key in a lock. The antibiotic drug has to find just the right protein on the surface of the bacteria to attach and cover the bacterium and choke it off and kill it. But if that protein is missing, the antibiotic drug can't attach and can't kill the bacterium. Now, if the bacteria can live without that protein, if a little bacteria guy is born without that protein and he can live through it, he's a little sickly little thing because that probably had a good function. But if he can live through, he can survive this loss of this trait, this mutation that leaves him without a certain trait he used to have. If he can live through it, the antibiotic can't kill him. And so him and all his little brothers and sisters will survive, you see. That's loss of a target feature. Is there a new gene? New DNA? A new trait? No, this is devolution. And if that's the way bacteria evolved, then why don't they just shut down all their genes and become people? You see, again, if you take this to its nth degree, it doesn't work. Loss of a target feature. Also, there's often a metabolite inside, and I could tell a story on that, but there are many different kinds of features that the antibiotic is seeking to use as the way to kill the bacterium, and if it's born without that chemical inside it or chemical outside it or some other metabolic pathway that it's going to take advantage of, if it's born without that and can live, it's immune to the antibiotic. But this is loss of it. These three are the only things you'll find in any research or textbook on how things can become immune. They might be able to reshuffle their genes and something fortuitous can happen, but it's a reshuffling of genes. They might be able to flip transposons around and do some stuff like that, but it's never an upward climb. None of these processes are capable of changing worms into people. And not only in the bacteria, but also moths. You might have seen this. How many ever seen the Biston betularia, the peppered moth in England? Yes, the whole story of that. I am continually befuddled by this, that it's always seen as proof of evolution. Okay, let's just do the simple thing. Here's before the magic of evolution and after. Okay, over here I see white moths and black moths, and over here I see white moths and before and after picture with the magic of evolution in between. Again, any new genes, new traits, new DNA? No, nothing. It's just more of the same ones as before. This is just natural selection. We know this happens, but this can't get you, from little water fleas to moths, and it can't get you from moths to Pegasuses or something. It's not happening. Look what it says up here. Evolution, to judge whether evolution has occurred, any change of allele frequency or how often an allele shows up signifies evolution has occurred. Again, if that's all evolution is, I believe. But when they use the word evolution here, they're saying, oh, you silly creationists, we're just saying a shift in gene frequencies. And I'm saying, no, you're not. When you use this word, you know what everyone thinks you're talking about. You know everybody thinks you're talking about fish turning into monkeys, turning into people. That's what they're trying to say, that this proves this. In real life, these conditions rarely, if ever, are met, blah, 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 blah. And it says, since a change in allele frequency is our definition of evolution, then evolution has occurred. Since our definition is change in allele frequency. It's a slogan. When you sloganize sloppy thinking, it sounds legitimate. And the finches. How many ever seen the little Darwin's finches, the Galapagos finches thing? Yeah, on a year where there's more of a food supply of bugs, then the bug-catching beaks work better for the little guys. There's always finches being born every year, little baby finches with long, skinny beaks and big nut-cracking, seed-cracking beaks. And, of course, during a good seed year, the seed ones do fine. But in a bad seed year, only the bug-eating ones do good. And it shifts back and forth. And Peter and Rosemary Grant, who did the book, The Beak of the Finch, and they're quoted in Miller's book as saying, we never did see a new species evolve. And when the weather went back and the seeds came back, the birds with the seed-cracking beaks returned to normal. Some of these beaks changed in length 12 times longer. And after conditions went back, the beaks went back to normal in the next few generations. And I asked a professor at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, I said, sir, can evolution, can chance, random mutation, and natural selection act in 10 years to do something like that? He goes, well, of course, no. I said, well, this isn't random mutation and evolution. It isn't mutation at all, is it? It's just natural selection of genes that are already there, and it's interbreeding and random assortment of things. It's just shuffling the genetic deck and dealing out a new hand every generation and seeing which hands win this generation, you see. But you're still dealing from the Finch deck. All the cards that come out to the next generation are Finch cards. I mean, it's like expecting to get an old maid out of an Uno deck. See what I mean? These are Finches. Bacteria stay bacteria, and that's just what the Bible says. Kinds reproducing after their kinds. And people have babies and dogs have puppies. It's always going to be that way. Okay. Now, here's another thing they'll put. How many ever seen this in a biology book? Yeah, where they try to say, now look at how similar the human arm is to the frog leg and the bat wing, a porpoise flipper, and a horse front leg. And they'll try to color code all the bones to show you they collaborate, and these are homologous or same parts, and it shows we all came from the same rat. All of these, well, actually, the frog and us all came from the Tiktaalik fish fossils, see? And it's trying to prove we all came from the same thing, because look, you can see the family similarity. You know, could it be a common ancestor, like they say it is, or a common designer? Now, look, the trick in homology is this. Yes, these limbs do look similar, but they also look kind of different from each other. How different? It depends on how different the function of these limbs is. How similar? It depends on how similar the function of these limbs is. How similar do they look? Just as similar as their function. The structure always is going with the function. God made porpoise flippers to be good for what porpoises have to do with them. He made the human hand good for what humans do with them. And they look only as similar as their functions are similar. It's completely explained. Now, I want to show you a quote about homology from one of the 20th century's most authoritative evolutionists. He lived to be 101, and Ernst Mayr wrote his opus magnum book, What Evolution Is, in the year 2001. Look at what he says about this very topic. Homologous structures. Since all members of a taxon, in other words, a classification group, must consist of the descendants of a nearest common ancestor, they must, this common descent can be inferred only by the study of their homologous characters. That's what we were just looking at. But how do we determine whether or not the characters of two species are indeed homologous and point to a common ancestor? Well, we say that they are if they conform to the definition of homologous. And here's the definition. A feature in two or more taxa is homologous when it is derived from the same common ancestor. Now, you got this. It's 10:30 almost, but you got it anyway. This is circular reasoning here. You know, it can easily be interpreted that there's a common design for these different purposes. Dr. Richard Feynman, the scientist Nobel Prize-winning scientist who discovered why the space shuttle blew up in the 1980s, said this about science. Science has a long history of learning how not to fool ourselves. And I think that our evolutionist friends are fooling themselves. The textbooks are fooling themselves. Animal Planet is fooling themselves. National Geographic is fooling themselves. And just I'll run through this real quick here, but some other evidences you'll see sometimes in textbooks of these vestigial organs. How many ever heard of vestigial organs? No, thank you. Okay. They're organs that are old leftovers, evolutionary leftovers from back in the day when we were rats and fish, and we don't use these organs anymore. In the early 1900s, there were 180 organs on that list. Because, see, we're so smart, if we can't figure out what something does, it must not do anything. We were talking about that with the genes, you know. It must not do anything. So we just put all these things on the list. How many have heard that we don't need our appendix? How many ever heard that? Yeah. Oh, terrible, terrible. Before you're born, before your red blood cells are made by your spleen and your bone marrow, your appendix generates red blood cells first. And if it's useful in any part of your life cycle, it's useful. I mean, your reproductive system isn't useful until you hit reproductive age, and that does not mean it's a vestigial organ. You know, if it's useful during any part of your lifespan, but plus, the appendix is highly vascularized, and it has lots of little lymph vessels for the lymph system, which is totally the immune system. The appendix seems to be very much involved with the immune system. It provides immunization to certain strains of polio before you're born. And also, recent research has said that it also harbors bacterial colonies. So if anything happens to your bacterial colony in your large intestine, in your colon, that it can just squirt out some extra germs and grow a new culture. Either that or you can eat Activia yogurt, But your appendix may be doing that. And there's other research that's recently come out saying the appendix also slips out kind of a lubricant to help things keep moving in your large intestines. I mean, you can live without it, but I can live without my left arm too, but how could I point, I can live without it, doesn't mean it doesn't have a function. And your tonsils, also highly associated with the immune system. When I was 6, they took my tonsils out because I got a 2-for-1 special. My sister had tonsillitis, and I did not, but they took them all out anyway. So this is why I teach against Darwin. I was mutilated because the doctors believed in evolution, you see, and that those were just, let's just rip out. That's what Dr. Dwayne T. Gish always said. He says, why don't we just take those vestigial organs and rip them out? We don't need them anyway. So here we go with our vestigial organs being ripped out. The adenoids, the adenoids and your thymus gland, all of these things really have a use. Evolutionists are very fond of pointing out the coccyx, or your tailbone at the bottom of the spine, that is useless. Shows we used to have tails, like those Avatar, guys with tails. And no, that you're using your coccyx right now. You see, if you were to sit down without the coccyx, it would hurt very much, or stand up in the same position. If you have to have your coccyx removed surgically because of bone cancer, you have terrible problems. How many of you ever bounced down some stairs on your tailbone? Did that hurt? Why would God put all those nerve endings in there? Why would evolution put all those nerve endings in there if it wasn't important? Look, the muscles of the lower back connect to the back of the coccyx, your tailbone. Your guts are held in by your abs, your 6-pack or your 1-pack, whatever it is. Your abs hold in your guts from the front. There aren't any bones down there, but there's a vase-shaped group of muscles in the behind that come back and hold in your guts from the back, and they attach to the front of the coccyx. Also, the muscles for childbirth are attached to the coccyx, and the muscles for your control of your rectum. That's kind of important, I'd say, for deciding when you want to have a bowel movement. Okay. Now, I was teaching in Venezuela one time, and the teacher was able to vouch for me on this. She had to have her coccyx removed. Her second baby had to be a cesarean. She had to have reconstructive bowel surgery so she could control her bowel movements, and she couldn't stand or sit in the same position for more than about 15 minutes without pain. The coccyx is not useless. Also, they'll point to these bones floating within the tissues of a whale and say that these used to be legs. Now, these bones also, in both male and female whales, are where the muscles and sinews for the reproductive organs of males and females are attached right there. The muscles that push a baby whale out from the mother in calving are attached to those. Don't tell me those don't have a purpose. And how about wisdom teeth? They'll say, oh, well, you see, now we get these teeth grow in when we're 18 years old, or 18-year molars, and you see, we evolved from monkeys that had these big old jaws. We got these big old monkey teeth and a little teeny human jaw, you see, and that's a real problem, and it's a problem because evolution, you see, is true. No, think. Look, 100 years ago, maybe 150 years ago, they didn't have good dental care. By the time you reached 18, you'd probably lost a few teeth. You probably need some spares. So what the spares that come in the back and push all your other teeth forward and make a nice smile so you can still attract a mate. Plus, muscles are not the only thing that will grow with constant working. Bones will become denser and heavier and more developed with working. And we all know that we eat soft foods now compared to back in the old days, hardtack biscuits and things. We used to chew harder things. Even young children would have more massively developed jaws by the time they reached 18. And so for those reasons and others, those aren't vestigial. It's not proof that we used to be monkeys. You see, and the blind cavefish, I don't want to get started on that. That's just another thing of natural selection, and I don't think I have too much time for that. I might come back to it. Let me see. I wanted to show you one thing right in Kenneth Miller's textbook. And one thing the evolutionists have actually got right, and that is that every single living human being comes from one of 4 gene pools. One of 4. Now that came out before the 2006 edition here. I think it was like 2002 or something. The research came out that everybody, and you can see a PBS special called Journey of Man. I forget the name of the fellow who hosted that one, but anyway, and it confirms this whole thing, 4 gene pools. And I thought about that, and I thought about that, and I prayed about that. It took about a half an hour before I realized, see, I'm always looking in the news flashes. I'm always looking in the evolutionist data and thinking, what? Does this really prove evolution, or is it in favor of creation? There was something about those 4 gene pools. Think of where did we all come from Adam and Eve? Yes. But after that, where did we all come from? Noah. Okay, who was on the ark? Noah and Mrs. Noah and the 3 boys. That makes 5 people all in the same family. That's 1 gene pool. But who else was on the ark? 3 ladies. They were the wives of the 3 sons, and presumably they were from 3 other families, so you don't get too inbred here. Okay, 3 other families. That's 4 gene pools on the ark. And look at this map, color-coded for the 4 different streams of human genes that Dr. Miller and PBS agrees is how it happened. Of course, they got the out of Africa theory. They say, well, they all evolved in Africa and then spread out to the rest of the world. But notice how they all went right through this region here, right through here. Right, they all came out of Africa, but they all went right here, and then they split up the rest of the world from there. Now, what could have happened there that sort of got people to spread out in 4 streams of gene pool ancestry from there? That, and there was something else too that happened right there. Shortly after they got off the ark was the Tower of Babel, and that was when the dispersion happened. You know, this doesn't actually prove Noah's Ark, but it goes with our story and not with theirs. There's all kinds of genetic evidence like that, but this book at least had something right. But what Kenneth Miller doesn't realize is his book shows genetic corroboration with the biblical historical account of Noah's Ark and exactly what happened then. So what are the schools teaching? How to spot lies in your textbooks. That was exactly what we wished to cover. Thank you. God bless you. Be encouraged, my brothers and sisters. We are on firm ground there on Shifting Sun.